Step into the chilling realm of science gone wrong, where history's darkest experiments unfold, from the twisted Tuskegee study to the haunting thalidomide tragedy and the mind-bending MKUltra. Brace yourself for tales of horror, betrayal, and ethical nightmares. Join us as we unveil the shocking chapters that stain the pursuit of knowledge, revealing the terrifying side of scientific curiosity that continues to send shivers down the spine of history. Our first tale is not from a horror movie, but a chilling reality that unfolded over the course of 4 decades. Let's set the stage. It's Macon County, Alabama. The year is 1932, and the United States Public Health Service, or USPHS, embarks on a twisted journey called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the African American Male. Their goal? To observe the natural history of untreated syphilis in the black population. But here's the kicker. 600 African American men were lured into this gruesome experiment under the pretense of receiving treatment for bad blood. But before we get into this nitty-gritty, let's rewind a bit. In the early 20th century, racist ideologies were running rampant. Social Darwinism, or scientific racism, and absurd beliefs about African Americans' physical and mental capacities were sadly the norm. From pre-Civil War justifications of enslavement to post-emancipation claims of mental and physical deterioration, these ideas paved the way for the Tuskegee study. Fast forward to Tuskegee, Alabama, the chosen battleground for this appalling experiment, with an estimated 35% of the population infected with syphilis. The researchers' mindset? Well, they genuinely thought that the black community wouldn't seek any treatment for syphilis, thanks to their flawed scientific beliefs about race, sexuality, and health. So, the USPHS set up shop in Macon County, promising free medical care to unsuspecting participants. As the experiment unfolds, researchers cling to the misguided notion that black individuals are inherently prone to sexually transmitted infections. Regardless of education or background, convincing them to seek treatment is considered a lost cause. Facing a participant shortage, the USPHS extends its reach, examining women and children. Men diagnosed with syphilis become unwitting subjects, while others receive actual treatments. Broken promises and shattered lives follow. As time passes, the untreated participants become ill and start missing appointments. Enter Nurse Eunice Rivers, employed to provide transportation, meals, and even cover funeral expenses. The Great Depression creates the perfect storm for exploitation. In 1943, the Henderson Act mandated publicly funded tests and treatments for venereal diseases. Then, by 1947, penicillin emerged as a cure for syphilis. But here's where it gets diabolical. Even after the discovery of penicillin, the USPHS not only failed to administer it, but actively ensured that 399 men were left untreated. They were in fact deliberately denied life-saving treatment. Why, you ask? Well, the researchers believed their subjects were too stoic to visit a doctor, conveniently forgetting that the men thought they were already being treated. Now, let's ponder a moment. How did those scientists get away with this for so long? The 1947 Nuremberg Code and the 1964 Declaration of Helsinki aimed to protect human subjects, yet the Centers for Disease Control, which took over the study, shamelessly continued it until 1969. Why did they persist? Was it pure scientific curiosity or a monstrous disregard for human life? Enter Peter Buxton, the unsung hero that blew the lid off this gruesome experiment. In 1972, the New York Times exposed the Tuskegee study on its front page, unleashing public outrage. Imagine by then only 74 test subjects were alive out of the 600 participants. 128 had succumbed to syphilis, 40 wives were infected, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. The horror, the tragedy. Legal action by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People results in a $10 million settlement and medical treatments for survivors. The Tuskegee study casts a dark shadow over American medical research, leading to the National Research Act of 1974. Informed consent and institutional review boards become mandatory, a stark reminder of the cost of unchecked scientific hubris. So you see, the Tuskegee study wasn't just an experiment gone awry, it was a stark reminder that even in the pursuit of knowledge, ethics must always be in check and take center stage. Our journey into the macabre now takes us to the heart of World War II and the disturbing experiments of Unit 731, a tale so horrifying it will chill your very soul. Picture this: the Pacific Theater, 1931. Japan's aggressive foray into Manchuria marked the ominous beginning of a genocidal war that would plunge the world into chaos. Amidst this madness emerged Unit 731, located in Harbin, Manchuria. It initially disguised itself as a research and public health agency that later metamorphosed into a nightmarish assembly line for weaponized diseases. The result? Some of the most sadistic human experiments in recorded history on thousands of prisoners of war, primarily Chinese. Our journey into the horrors of Unit 731 begins with Yoshimura Hisato, a physiologist with a penchant for hypothermia. Just think of prisoners' limbs submerged in icy water, frozen solid until they sound like a plank of wood. What a symphony of suffering. Hisato's methods of rapid rewarming ranged from scalding hot water to the cruel indifference of leaving limbs untreated overnight. Unit 731, once a research unit, evolved into a grotesque theater of suffering known as Maruta. Volunteers dwindled and ethical boundaries crumbled. The vivisection of conscious captives, euphemistically referred to as logs, became the grotesque norm. Thousands of men and women, even children, mostly Chinese captives, became unwilling participants in this hellish circus. Limbs amputated and reattached, organs removed while subjects were still alive, all in the name of scientific curiosity. When the last drop of utility was squeezed from their tortured bodies, a bullet or a lethal injection brought an end to their torment. None survived. The macabre didn't end with vivisection. Unit 731 delved into testing the limits of human endurance, with bound subjects enduring deprivation of food and water. Heavy objects dropped onto helpless prisoners, crushing injuries studied like perverse artworks. And then came the centrifuges, spinning human beings until they lost consciousness or died. Imagine the horror, a grotesque carnival of pain. But there's more. Unit 731, also fascinated by the ancient scourge of syphilis, turned to a twisted form of transmission. Male victims were ordered to rape fellow captives, ensuring the effective spread of the disease. Syphilitic horror unfolding in the name of knowledge. And now, brace yourself for a descent into the darkest abyss. Female captives, already subjected to diseases, chemical weapons, and traumatic injuries, were forcibly impregnated. Their bodies became the canvas for a grotesque experiment, studying the effects on fetuses under the most appalling conditions. As if this carnival of cruelty wasn't enough, Unit 731 had a grander plan: germ warfare. Tens of thousands of captives in Manchuria became unwitting subjects, infected with deadly pathogens like Yersinia pestis and typhus. Victims bled to death to breed the most lethal strains, and then the horror was unleashed. Clay bomb casings packed with fleas that had fed on dying prisoners rained down on Chinese villages. Witness accounts tell of a fine reddish dust settling, followed by a deadly outbreak that claimed thousands of lives. As World War II drew to a close, so did the nightmare of Unit 731. The Soviet army uncovered their atrocities, leading to the Khabarovsk war crimes trial in 1949. Shockingly, the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal largely ignored Unit 731 due to a controversial immunity deal struck by the US for their research data. The aftermath of this horror wasn't just forgotten history. The world, horrified by the ethical pitfalls of scientific advancement, birthed the Nuremberg Code and the Declaration of Helsinki, ethical beacons to guide research and experimentation. But here lies the conundrum. Can we justify using data obtained through torture? Some argue its inherent unethical nature, while others point to potential benefits in fields like bioterrorism research. What drives us to do these monstrous deeds? How do we prevent science from becoming the very weapon of our demise? What do you think? Let's move now to a macabre exploration of the human psyche that went shockingly awry. Alright, in the murky depths of 1971, the brilliant but misguided psychologist Philip Zimbardo and his comrades embarked on an experiment designed to pry into the sinister corners of the human soul, the Stanford Prison Experiment, also known as the Zimbardo Prison Experiment. Picture this: a chilling basement carefully transformed into a hellish prison. 3 grim cells with 3 desperate souls each, guards given a taste of unchecked power, and prisoners stripped of their humanity. It was an explosive concoction of power dynamics and human vulnerability. Now, our protagonist, Zimbardo, inspired by the audacious Stanley Milgram and his obedience experiment, sought to dive even deeper into the abyss of situational variables on human behavior. How, you ask? By crafting an experiment that would haunt the annals of psychology forever by investigating the willingness of participants to obey authority figures at any cost. Enter 24 unsuspecting undergraduate students, handpicked for a descent into psychological chaos. No criminal records, no psychological baggage, and certainly no inkling of what awaited them in the simulated prison of Stanford University's psychological building. All lured by the siren call of $15 a day, little did they know they were signing up for a descent into madness. And the stage was set. A claustrophobic maze of cells, guards with newfound authority, and prisoners confined 24/7. Hidden cameras and microphones poised to capture every twisted nuance of the unfolding horror. The question lingered in the air. How would these seemingly normal individuals react to this orchestrated chaos? As the days passed, the experiment spiraled out of control like a runaway train, hurtling towards disaster. Originally slated for 14 days, it screeched to a halt after just 6. The guards, intoxicated by their newfound dominance, unleashed a torrent of abuse on the prisoners. The once healthy participants exhibited signs of extreme stress and anxiety, like a dark cloud casting its shadow over their sanity. The aftermath, a psychological wasteland. Hostile interactions, dehumanization, and severe emotional distress became the bitter fruits of Zimbardo's dark creation. The guards reveled in aggression. The prisoners succumbed to depression, and the researchers themselves lost touch with reality. It was a chilling display of the fragility of the human psyche under the influence of power and control. Zoom in on critical perspectives and fast forward to the present. The Stanford prison experiment has been under intense scrutiny. Critics sharpen their daggers, pointing at the ethical quagmire that surrounds Zimbardo's creation. The once revered study is now marred by allegations of unethical practices, a lack of generalizability, and a questionable degree of realism. But wait, there's more. Recent excavations of the experiment's archives and interviews with participants have unearthed disturbing revelations. Some participants admitted to faking breakdowns, altering their behavior to manipulate the outcome, and even accusing the experimenters of actively encouraging the guards' abusive actions. It's a plot twist that would make even the most seasoned thriller writer gasp. Then, the journal American Psychologist delivered the final blow in 2019, branding the Stanford prison experiment as an incredibly flawed study that should have died an early death. The once mighty edifice of psychological inquiry crumbled, leaving behind a trail of shattered assumption. But why was Zimbardo's experiment condemned as unethical? The answers paint a ghastly picture. Participants were thrust into the nightmare with incomplete knowledge, subjected to abuse, and left without proper debriefings. It's a dark stain on the pages of scientific history, revealing the depths some are willing to plunge in the pursuit of knowledge. Let's now move on to a dark chapter of medical history that left an indelible mark on the world: the thalidomide tragedy. 60 years ago, on December 2nd, 1961, the UK witnessed the shocking withdrawal of the sedative drug thalidomide. Marketed as a remedy for morning sickness in pregnant women, little did they know it was a one-way ticket to tragedy. Just try and visualize babies born with underdeveloped limbs, a grotesque result of a drug gone horribly wrong. Thalidomide, or as it was charmingly known in the UK, Distaval, was once hailed as a safe sedative. But, spoiler alert, it wasn't. It was like a horror movie where the monster hides in plain sight. The point is how this untested nightmare ended up in the hands of pregnant mothers. It turns out the early tests on thalidomide were as flimsy as a haunted house's door. The studies lacked rigor. No placebo groups, no double-blind experiments, and no clue about how long treatment went on. Dr. Widukind Lenz, a post-tragedy investigator, described those studies as having so little scientific value they should never have seen the light of day. But the horror doesn't stop there. Thalidomide was unleashed on the unsuspecting public, prescribed from everything from flu to the morning sickness that accompanies pregnancy. And get this, it was never even tested on pregnant animals. Fast forward to the late 50s, and babies are being born with limbs resembling something out of a nightmare. Investigations kick in, and thalidomide is on the suspect list. Some argued it couldn't be the culprit because not all babies born to thalidomide-taking mothers had deformities. But twist alert, later research showed thalidomide only wreaked havoc during a specific stage of pregnancy. It gets juicier. A flu treatment, Grip-X, had thalidomide sneakily tucked in. Some mothers who claimed innocence had unknowingly danced with this devil. It was like finding out your favorite candy bar is laced with a deadly toxin. Pure nightmare fuel. Enter Dr. William McBride from Down Under, who, after witnessing birth defects, managed to convince a Sydney hospital to stop prescribing thalidomide to pregnant women. He wrote to The Lancet, dropping a bombshell on the world. But hold your breath. When he sought a lab study to prove his theory, he hit a brick wall. Science meet bureaucracy. When animal tests finally rolled around, the results were grim. Thalidomide showcased its evil range, from miscarriages to heart, brain, and eye damage, not to mention those twisted limbs. Some argued animal tests weren't foolproof because not all showed malformations, but surprise, animals often cannibalize deformed offspring, so the morning cleanup crew might have wiped out the evidence. To add another layer of chaos, some studies dissolved thalidomide in water for injections instead of the ominous pill form. Turns out, the active ingredients break down in the water solution, rendering the test useless. It's like trying to decipher a cursed code. However, as evidence stacked up against thalidomide, the manufacturer's facade crumbled. Shami Grunenthal withdrew the drug on November the 26th of 1961. The UK followed suit on December the 2nd, 1961, but here's the kicker. The UK government did not issue a formal warning until May 1962. That's right, folks. Thalidomide might have been lurking in medicine cabinets, silently plotting its next move on the public for months. Compensation for victims dragged on, the truth buried under bureaucracy. It took a Sunday Times investigation in 1972 to lift the veil and force a tenfold increase in compensation. Talk about shining a spotlight on the shadows of science. Confidence in the pharmaceutical industry crumbled. The Minister of Health in 1963 revealed the bitter truth. Any inadequately tested drug could waltz into the market, putting the public at risk. Cue the birth of the Committee on the Safety of Drugs in June 1963 and the Medicines Act of 1968, tightening the grip on pharmaceutical control. Now, the lingering question: could this happen again? 60 years on, no prescription drugs have wreaked havoc on unborn babies, and no deaths occurred in clinical trials. Why? Well, because regulators mandated rigorous animal safety testing, weeding out potential nightmares. And what about thalidomide itself? Plot twist. Further research uncovered its redeeming qualities in treating leprosy, some AIDS-related conditions, and certain cancers. But there's a catch, of course. It's a strict no-no for anyone remotely associated with pregnancy. Finally, we have Project MKUltra, a tale of clandestine experiments, mind-altering drugs, and a government gone rogue. Let's unravel this web of horror together. Picture the 1950s and 60s, the height of the Cold War. The United States, gripped by fear, believed the Soviet mind control was turning their own citizens into unwitting pawns. In response, enter Alan Dulles, the CIA's mastermind, who greenlit Project MKUltra in 1953. A covert operation with one sinister goal: harnessing drugs like LSD for mind control, information gathering, and psychological torture. Over 150 human experiments unfolded, involving psychedelic drugs, paralytics, and electroshock therapy. Sometimes subjects knew they were a part of a study, other times they had no clue, caught in a twisted web of psychological manipulation. Universities, hospitals, and prisons in the US and Canada became the stage for these diabolical trials. Enter Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA's chemist and poison expert, with a vision as twisted as a haunted labyrinth. Under MKUltra, LSD became the focal point. In the early 50s, he orchestrated the purchase of the world's entire LSD supply for a whopping $240,000. He then unleashed this psychedelic Pandora's box across America. Hospitals, clinics, and even prisons became unwitting stages for LSD experiments, all in the name of understanding how it could be weaponized for mind control. However, MKUltra's twisted canvas extended beyond LSD. The experiments danced with ecstasy, mescaline, heroin, barbiturates, methamphetamine, and even psilocybin, the infamous magic mushrooms. The quest for control of the human mind knew no bounds. Yeah, really. Hold on to your seats, because MKUltra's Twisted Carnival had another act, Operation Midnight Climax. Government-employed prostitutes lured unsuspecting men into CIA safe houses for drug experiments. Picture this, the CIA dosing men with LSD and watching behind two-way mirrors while sipping cocktails. It was like a scene from a dystopian party, with recording devices disguised as electrical outlets capturing the chaos. Enter Ken Casey, the brilliant mind behind One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Casey volunteered for MKUltra experiments with LSD while at Stanford University. Post-experiment, he morphed into a psychedelic Pied Piper, hosting wild LSD-fueled parties called acid tests. Picture this, a kaleidoscopic fusion of drug-induced euphoria, live bands like the Grateful Dead, and fluorescent paint. The ripple effect of MKUltra actually extended beyond Casey's acid tests. Notable figures like Grateful Dead lyricist Robert Hunter, the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, the infamous mobster James Joseph Whitley, burglar, reportedly volunteered for CIA-backed experiments. Little did they know, they were unwittingly laying the foundation for a generational rebellion against the very institution that birthed the psychedelic wave. As the curtains began to fall on MKUltra in 1973, Sidney Gottlieb, along with his patron Richard Helms, orchestrated the destruction of countless records. Boxes full of MKUltra documents were obliterated. An attempt to wipe away traces of the horrors perpetuated under the guise of scientific inquiry. While some records survived, the true extent of Gottlieb's malevolent experiments remained shrouded in shadows. Anyway, fast forward to 1974. Seymour Hersh's expose in the New York Times peeled back the layers of MKUltra's horror. It triggered a cascade of revelations about non-consensual drug experiments and illegal spying on US citizens. President Ford established the United States President's Commission on CIA Activities within the United States, commonly known as the Rockefeller Commission, to investigate these dark deeds. Simultaneously, the Church Committee, led by Senator Frank Church, delved into CIA and FBI abuses during the aftermath of Nixon's resignation. The curtain was lifted on MKUltra's atrocities, leading to Ford's 1976 executive order prohibiting experimentation with drugs on human subjects without informed consent. What do you think of these insane chapters in history where science embraced unspeakable horror in its quest for control? The echoes of these scientific horrors will forever linger. What if more secrets are lurking in the corners of history? What untold stories remain buried in the pursuit of knowledge? Share your theories and delve into the comment section below. Who knows what dark revelations await our next exploration? Subscribe, stay curious, and join us as we uncover the mysteries that science dared to keep hidden.